Arise, Sir War Criminal, Tony Blair. Sir Tony Blair, welcome to the Galloway Show every Wednesday at this time, live on YouTube. And thank you to the six-figure number that watched last week's show, all or in part. There's so much to talk about. I'm not sure I'll get it all in an hour. I will be continuing the discussion on my Patreon page thereafter. But even though I suspect you'll have to tune in to the mother of all talk shows on Sunday evening on all the platforms left to me at 7 p.m. London time, because many of these are developing stories, many of them stories of great moment. Let's start where else but at Windsor Castle. We know how to deal with war criminals in this country. We put them in patent shoes with gold buckles, pantyhose, or tights as we call them here. We put a velvet cloak around the war criminal, and we put a stupid hat on his head. Not this kind of hat, not a classy fedora, a 17th century plumed hat with the ostrich feathers blowing in the wind. That's at least what Sir Tony Blair, as we must now call him, was subjected to. There he was with his good wife, now Lady Cherie Blair, dressed to the nines, well, the 0.9s perhaps, and the two of them were cavorting with other knights of the Garter, of the caliber of Prince Andrew, Ghislaine Maxwell, and Jeffrey Epstein, bosom buddy, if I can put it that way. Tony Blair has, on this level, on this earth, in this life, done very well indeed for himself. Indeed, his eldest son is now worth £1.3 billion, and I think he's in his early 30s. He has had a great start in life, of course, growing up in number 10 Downing Street, and no doubt a great financial hand up from his father, who is now worth more than £100 million and who has in the region of 40 different homes. I'm not making that number up. It is not a misprint or a misspeak. The Blairs have mightily prospered. How they'll do on the Judgment Day is for somebody else to decide. But for a man who made his name and made his fortune invading and mass murdering millions of people around the world, it is indeed a morality tale. Not just a British morality tale, but it certainly is that. The war criminal that got the plumed hat will live for a long time as emblematic of the kind of Britain we have and from which we must escape, which we must fundamentally alter. But it's also an international morality tale, because the likes of Blair, Nancy Pelosi, Mr. Pelosi, of whom probably least said the better, and other plutocrats around the Western world are now apparently unabashed and unashamed at not just feathering their own nests, but heaping their own nests with ill-gotten gains. I remind you that Tony Blair was the leader of something called the Labour Party, the party founded 122 years ago to stand up for the ordinary worker, to be a voice for the ordinary working class person in the British Parliament. It is astounding that today's Labour Party, led by Sir Keir Starmer, are now utterly and unabashedly beholden to the very same Sir Tony Blair. They are perfectly relaxed about the filthy rich Tony Blair. They are perfectly relaxed about the neoliberal economics that he came to personify. They are utterly relaxed at the endless thirst for war and oppression that he championed alongside first Bill Clinton and later George W. Bush. It's an international morality tale because, of course, when he finally left office as the Prime Minister of Britain, he became the Middle East Peace Envoy. How's that going? What kind of job did he do there? Maybe we'll have time to squeeze one or two observations about that in the course of this program this evening. The Middle East Peace Envoy, appointed by something that calls itself the international community. Joe Biden is in the vicinity at the moment. He is begging the kings of Saudi Arabia to up their oil production so as to mitigate the damages being done to the United States, the United Kingdom, and just about every Western country by his ill-gotten declaration of economic war against the Russian Federation. The only countries that haven't been punished, haven't been brought to their knees by Joe Biden's economic war declaration are, well, Russia for starters, whose currency is currently the best performing in the world, where petrol is retailing at 67 pence per litre, when in Britain it is over £2 per litre, heading towards £10 a gallon, and in the United States, where people are beginning to revolt at the gas stations across the country, the vast subcontinental country, which people have been used since the invention of the motor car to traversing anytime they liked in an affordable way, are now paying a very high price for Joe Biden's declaration of war. In fact, there being nothing of note necessary to be spent on in the United States, Joe Biden announced today another $1 billion worth of aid to the failing Coup regime in Kiev. Another $1 billion that the American people didn't need. They are now $50 billion poorer at the expense of Ukraine. And that's just the military and economic aid. If you factor in the cost to the American economy and people themselves, it is virtually incalculable. The cost of a war that has lasted only a little over 100 days. Imagine if it lasts 100 weeks, 100 months. Just imagine if it were to last for the length of time that the American-Afghan adventure lasted. 20 whole years. Just calibrate what the cost to the American taxpayer that is going to be. Of course, as I say, the American people have no need of that money. They're not on their knees with an economy that is sinking. In fact, almost crashing. A stock market that is literally crashing, and mass unemployment, poverty, homelessness, evictions, lack of affordable health care, unpayable student debt, not to mention the 22 mass shootings in the United States since the mass shooting at the Ross High School in Uvalde. That's right. Those of you around the world, not in America, are still thinking about that mass shooting. But there have been 22 mass shootings since that particular mass shooting. So a society that is getting along so happily, that is so comfortable in its own skin, whose economy is doing so well, whose healthcare systems are operating so effectively can well afford $50 billion and counting being sent to the actor Zelensky in Kiev, for as long as Zelensky is there, of course. Threats to murder him are now commonplace, not by the Russians, but by Ukrainians, by the kind of Nazi fascist Ukrainians that we were told did not actually really exist in the country, and we'd be shadow banned, if not banned, if we continued to draw attention to it. They are now putting posters on walls, circulating leaflets, promising the murder of the comedian Zelensky. The United States, of course, has run out of people to shoot in school shootings, so a significant number of American mercenaries have now turned up in Ukraine because there are schools there that haven't yet been shot up and need gunmen from Alabama or Arkansas to show up in their country and do the dirty, do the needful. 2 mercenaries have now been captured by Russian or Russian-aligned forces, and the White House is aware of them. I presume the fate of these mercenaries will be the same as the 2 British mercenaries who have been sentenced to death in the Donbass courts for war crimes against their country as mercenaries. Mercenaries are never a good look. American and British mercenaries who can speak not a word of Ukrainian, who can never point to a single unpronounceable name on a map and say, I am going to shed blood and give my blood there for any other reason than the earning of filthy lucre, really deserve no mercy, but I call for some. I'm an opponent of the death penalty, and I hope that these men are not executed. But if they are executed, they will join a very long list of Ukrainians who have been executed ever since 2014 in the war of attrition carried out by Petroshenko and then by Zelensky in the Coup regime in Kiev against their own people. That phrase is not used often enough. I remember the din of its use in Iraq when the Iraqi regime was bombing Kurdish targets. We would all the time hear that Saddam Hussein was bombing and killing his own people, as if actually that was an even worse crime than killing other people. Of course, killing any people is bad and wrong. But somehow the killing of your own people came to be, in the 21st century, a particularly heinous crime, unless it was in Ukraine. 14,000 men, women, and children, many of them children, more of them women, were murdered by the regime in Kiev without a single word being raised against it by the people that told us the killing of your own people was an unconscionable crime. No one raised the demand for the right to protect RTP, coined by Bill Clinton and Tony Blair in the Chicago Doctrine, which now appears to be the centerpiece of the rules-based order. We are allowed to invade other countries to protect their people from their own government, from their own regime, but Russia is not entitled to RTP, the Russian compatriots and Russian speakers that were being massacred in the eastern part of Ukraine. Now, the war is going very badly indeed. It's going very badly on multiple fronts. I'll come to the military front in a minute. But on the propaganda front, it is failing badly. There's now, this evening, a hue and cry to ban the Pope, shadow ban him at least, maybe even put him to sleep like John Paul I, maybe even to rid us of this turbulent priest. Why? Because Pope Francis has now twice stated that the responsibility for the war in Ukraine is not Russia's alone. Today he said that the war in Ukraine was provoked by NATO, and by which he means by the United States. The others are mere satraps carrying out the orders of the United States, with Britain as the satrap in chief, the bootlicker of all bootlickers. The Pope was talking just a couple of weeks after saying that NATO barking at Russia's door with its never-ending expansionism in defiance of promises made on the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the Soviet Union and its satellites, the barking at Russia's door had helped to provoke this disaster in Ukraine. And now he said it again. And His Holiness is under attack. The dogs of war propaganda are unleashed. They're crying havoc and they are out to get him. So, Holy Father, I ask someone in the Swiss Guard to drink your tea before you do, to taste your food before you do. You are in clear and present danger, because we cannot have the truth getting out. But you know what? It's out, all right. Count the Ukrainian flags in your country if you don't believe me. I myself have seen at least 50% of the Ukrainian flags around here disappear over the last few weeks as people calibrated the cost of the bottomless financial and military support for the regime in Kiev. Partly people realizing that things were not as they had been led to believe they were, that all was not as it was cracked up to be. Partly accounting of Zelensky's money in the Pandora Papers, in the offshore bank accounts in the Cayman Islands. Partly the pictures of his oceanfront boulevard in Miami, Florida. Partly an understanding of the Second World War character of the Ukrainian nationalist beast and its role in the Eastern Holocaust, the mass murder of millions of Jews, of Poles, of Ukrainians that they didn't like, the appreciation that actually this will not end well for the countries that provoked it, for the countries that have funded it, encouraged it, fanned the flames of war. This will not end well. And so the flags are coming down. Count the Ukrainian flags on your Twitter feed. They've decreased by 90%, not 50% over recent weeks. The propaganda war is going disastrously badly. But the military war is going even worse. This war did not have to be fought. All it needed was a pen and Zelensky's signature that Ukraine would not join NATO and be a neutral country, that Ukraine would implement the Minsk I and II agreements that they had already signed and which are guaranteed by the governments of Germany and France. That's all he had to do to avoid this war and save the lives of thousands of people and billions, if not trillions, of dollars of damage, not just to Ukraine, but to the world economy, to the food security of much of the poor world, to the energy security and coming fuel poverty of people even in the richest Western countries. That's all it needed, a pen. Even when it began, and there were negotiations in Belarus and in Turkey, it could have been ended on terms less advantageous to Ukraine than that, but still far more advantageous than they are going to be at the end of this conflict. A recognition of Russian suzerainty over the Crimea, where the Russian Navy has been based since before the United States even existed as a country, as a state. The recognition of the rights of self-government of the people of Donetsk and Lugansk. But once the war began, of course, these terms became less and less attainable. And so now we are in a situation where all of Eastern Ukraine will be taken, will either be governed as an East Ukrainian entity or may indeed even be absorbed into Novorussia, new Russia, almost certainly, in my view, involving Belarus also. You'll have a new Russian state with Belarus in it, with Eastern Ukraine in it, with Transnistria in it. Because, of course, once the Russian and Russian-backed forces occupy the entire Black Sea coastline of the Ukraine, they're not going to stop short of a land bridge to Transnistria, where hundreds of thousands of Russian people live under threat, and not just threat from the Western Ukrainian entity. So this war, when it ends, and it may take a year or more for it to end, will, in my view, mean that there will be two Ukraines, or at least the Ukraine that continues to exist will have a capital in Kiev. It will be nibbled at by the Polish revanchist regime, and the Hungarian government will want some of its Carpathian Hungarians back and their land from the Western Ukrainian entity. Poland will want its Polish hegemony in some parts of Western Ukraine, will want it back, even though there are now no Poles there, largely because they were massacred in their millions by the Nazi occupation, aided and abetted by the very Ukrainian nationalists that Poland is now in bed with, at least for the present moment. That Kiev, that Western Ukraine, will be a new Kosovo. In other words, a NATO and EU dependency with no economic resources of its own, an endless drain on the taxpayers of Western Europe and the North American subcontinent, a military camp, basically, in which weapons, prostitutes, drugs, and crime will be the main exports. It's a very grim, disturbing, dystopian future that stretches out in front of us. And you got to wonder at the sanity, the actual sanity of the Western leaders that thought this was a good idea. The Western journalists and broadcasters that shilled for it. And the big tech corporations that suppressed all of those who said it was a bad idea. It's now mainstream in the American media, quoting White House sources, that there is grave concern about the blowback for Western economies of the over-sanctioning, is a phrase I saw today, of Russia by the West in the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Over-sanctioning. We're now worried that we have over-sanctioned them because it hasn't harmed them and is devastating us. Never mind a boomerang, never mind a big stone that we lifted and dropped it on our own feet. This is a boomerang nuclear missile that we have fired, and it is devastating our own countries, our own economies, exacerbating all of the social problems that we have and stretching into the foreseeable future. Because, look, I don't speak for Russia. I don't know the Russian state mind. But if I was running Russia and the United States and Europe came to me and said, hey, we think we've over-sanctioned you, I'd tell you to go and get stuffed. Although I'd put it more strongly than that. I wouldn't want anything more to do with you. I wouldn't want you to lift any of the sanctions that you have put on me. I'd want to strike out in a different direction, which is what Russia is doing. Ever closer to China, a call today between President Xi and President Putin, reaffirming the strategic partnership of these two countries. India, Iran, South Africa to an extent, Brazil soon to a very significant extent. In fact, the entire Latin American subcontinent are all drifting towards Eurasia. All roads and sea lanes lead to Eurasia and the new Eurasian future. I would, if it was me, tell Joe Biden, over-sanctioned? Well, we warned you. I'm one of those that did warn them. I have been shadow banned. You wouldn't believe the level of suppression of my activity on social media. So far, except YouTube. Although my subscriber numbers have perilously hovered at 198,000 for so long, I'm beginning to wonder if they will ever be allowed to reach 200,000. But YouTube, the least. All the others, Facebook in particular, Twitter in particular, are not just suppressing my output. They are actually banning from their platforms some of the most important voices, the voices we actually most need to hear, even if we reject what it is that they have to say. But if we don't even know what it is they have to say, then we don't know the possibility that we are heading in entirely the wrong direction and towards a cliff over which we may well tumble, at which point it will be too late to climb back. I want to conclude, though there's much else I would like to say. I'll get a chance, I'm sure, on the questions. Thanks for all who are super chatting. That's really helpful so that we can reinstate the midweek mother of all talk shows, so we can have 2 shows a week, 3 hours long, with several cameras and many guests and take calls and all the things that are superior to this show. And to reinstate the very popular podcast that we had, award-winning, chart-busting podcast that we had, that we've also had to discontinue. So that fighting fund is for that. Please give. The fastest way to give is by the super chat, and I read out your comments. And the other way, of course, is through Moat's website. And go to the donate moats.tv and go to the donate function there. I'm against nationalism. I'm against Ukrainian nationalism. I'm against Scottish nationalism. I'm against Croatian nationalism or Serbian nationalism. I'm against nationalism. I don't believe in breaking up countries. I have all my life opposed it. I don't believe in partitioning countries, especially islands, which is why for my entire life I have opposed the partition of the island of Ireland, the land of my grandfathers. The partitioning of small countries can only lead to trouble, and 100 years of trouble in the island of Ireland, and counting, not finished yet. The partitioning of countries can only lead to the exacerbation of pre-existing problems, and the false fool's gold treasure hunt of looking for enemies under bushes based on their national or ethnic identity, when those ethnic and national identities were never the real reason for the problems that you had in the first place. Of course, an exception sometimes has to be made where there is national oppression, that is to say, an oppression which is visited on people by virtue of their nationality and ethnicity by another more powerful nationality or ethnicity with which they share a state. Then sometimes partition and separatism is a melancholy necessity, but only a lunatic would claim. I mean, a lunatic would claim that that national oppression existed in Britain. The idea that the English are oppressing the Scots is not just untrue. In many important regards, it is the precise opposite of the truth. Take public expenditure, for example. Every Scot, man, woman, and child, receives every year thousands of pounds more in public expenditure than the people of England and Wales receive. Not because Scotland is uniquely poor. There are parts of England far more poor, and I've represented them in Parliament. I know that are much poorer than Scotland. There are parts of Wales that are much poorer than Scotland. There are parts of England that are much poorer than Scotland. There are parts of London that are much poorer than Scotland. These people are poor not because of nationality or ethnicity, but because of the economic system that exists here. That oppression is not national oppression. That oppression is economic oppression, conducted by the very few against the very many, absolutely unconscious of the color of their skin or their hair. Red-haired people are not specially oppressed by capitalism. Neither are black-faced people specially oppressed by capitalism. Capitalism oppresses everyone amongst the very many and not within the ranks of the very few. And it goes without saying that only if we can unite all the red-haired people, the black and brown-faced people, the people of London, of Somerset and Cornwall and Gloucestershire and the Midlands and the northwest and the northeast of England, the people of Scotland, only when we can unite all of those to change the economic system that we operate, can we be truly free. The proximate reason for my raising that now is that Nicola Sturgeon yesterday published yet another document promising yet again to organize an illegal independence referendum if the Westminster Parliament does not grant one, which it will not. You know, you could argue, I don't, but you could, that in 1606, when a Scottish king united Scotland and England, with him as the king of both, that was the end of that matter. You could certainly argue that in 1707, over 300 years ago, this issue was solved when the Scottish Parliament voted for a united kingdom. You can certainly overwhelmingly argue that in 2014, when we had what was called by the nationalists a once-in-a-lifetime guarantee, a once-in-a-lifetime referendum, that was really going to be the end of the matter. But it wasn't. The people, on a date chosen by the nationalists, answered a question coined by the nationalists on a franchise designed by the nationalists, voted decisively to reject nationalism, to remain in Britain. By 55 to 45, we said no. That really should have been the end of it, at least for a generation. What's a generation? Well, it's at least 25 years. But the nationalists have been demanding a second referendum, not after 25 years, but not even 25 months later. They were demanding another go. And be in no doubt, if they got another referendum and they lost it again, which they would simply demand another and another and another until they could get the result that they wanted. And so I am completely opposed to the partitioning of this country. Sturgeon admitted today that there would have to be a hard border, customs posts at a border, travelled uncountable times by Scottish people into England and England into Scotland. A border across which almost all of Scotland's exports go. England and Wales, the rest of the UK, constitutes 3/4 of the market for Scottish goods and services. And we're going to put German Shepherd dogs and razor wire and walls and so on between these two countries. You think I'm going to stand by and let you make the people of Newcastle, where I am on the 27th of this month at the Copthorne Hotel, a place and a people that I love, you think I'm going to be silent while you make these people foreigners to me? You think I'm going to accept that the people of Liverpool and Manchester, to which I travel virtually weekly, are foreigners to me? You think I'm going to agree that I live in a different country to them? Never. Not as long as God gives me breath. But here is very definitely my final one. Boris Johnson doesn't have the wit or the guts or the strength to deal with this matter or many other matters. Taking back control is the one thing that Boris Johnson's government has not done. European judges tell him what Britain's immigration policy must be. Scottish nationalist twerps in an overblown local authority sitting in Edinburgh call all the shots, spend the money that his government gives them on breaking up the country of which he is the Prime Minister. He does nothing about it. They set up entire edifices of propaganda and subversion to defend Britain against foreign enemies who have no interest in us. And don't do that to combat the enemy within that is trying to break up and destroy the country, take away half of its territory. If Iran was threatening to take half of Britain's territory, we'd be doing something about it, wouldn't we, Boris? What are you doing meaningfully about the threat to take half our territory that is mounted by this constant never-ending, this constant agitation to the exclusion of all else in Scotland. This never-ending nationalist, separatist project. You are doing nothing about it and don't appear to be able to do any more about that than you are to stop the rubber dinghies arriving daily on your southern coast. You are incapable of standing up for Britain against Biden, for taking an internationalist course for Britain in international affairs. You are in office, but not in power. It's 10:40, 41. I better take some questions. I got carried away there. My blood was up. Any questions, Gayatri, that I should address? Eric Husso says, everyone, stop supporting and voting for these two sick, corrupt, divisive imperialist parties. Expose this corrupt political system. It will be glorious, win or lose. Jimmy Dore for President 2024. Jimmy Dore in 24. That's a slogan I can get behind. Let's have a People's Party in the United States with Jimmy Dore as its presidential candidate. If I can get in, I'll be over there campaigning for him. Tom Sinden, I still want to respect our honors, but it is becoming difficult. I think a garter that is worn by Prince Andrew and Sir Tony Blair is not a garter I'd want to wear. Let's take some more. Monkey Boy says, Kirk Starmer couldn't lead starving kittens to a bowl of milk. Labour needs a new leader, but who? Well, the funniest thing I saw this week was a report that Keir Starmer had told his own cabinet, shadow cabinet, to stop calling him boring. Well, here's a hat tip, Keir. When you've got to stop your colleagues calling you boring, you almost certainly are boring. In fact, you're so boring, so wooden, the birds are trying to nest in you. You are the epitome of a bore, a golf club bore. Butt out and let the Labour Party choose someone, please, that can at least talk, can at least feign their outrage against Boris Johnson in a way that doesn't involve them reading page after page of material prepared for them by a special parliamentary advisor. René Hermes, hello from Denmark. One thing to say to the US empire, free Assange. Indeed, these are very difficult times for my good friend Julian Assange. His fate is in the hands, for the moment at least, of the unprettiest of all conservative ministers, Priti Patel. I wouldn't want my life to be dangling on that string. It is a crying shame. Giles McComish gives £20. Thank you, Giles. Looking forward to Newcastle. Will be a great night. Thank you, Giles. I look forward to that. I'll be at the Copthorne Hotel in Newcastle, 7 o'clock on the 27th of June. Come and see me. I'll be showing my film, Killing Kelly, about the strange death during the regime of Tony Blair, during the time of the Iraq War. You get my drift? You'll like it. Come and see me. You can still get tickets from the from Ticket Quarter, I think. Vladimir Zelensky says, Polish Prime Minister calls for a no-fly zone over Ukraine. We can only support this proposal because any kind of support makes sense. Yeah, right. A no-fly zone over Ukraine has no chance of being imposed, and if imposed, will be opposed. And then a state of war will exist between the Russian Federation and the countries of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, starting with Poland. Bok Jan Duma gives 10 euros. Thank you very much. Poor Paul Mason, seems we're all out to get him. Well, Oscar Wilde, as always, said it best. On looking at the plight of poor Paul Mason, one is reminded of Oscar Wilde's bon mot about the death scene of Little Nell in Charles Dickens' novel of the same name. You need a heart of stone not to laugh. God, King, Emperor, 20 US dollars. Thank you very much, Your Grace, Your Highness, Your Emperorship. Love your show, GG. You're one of the few that speaks the truth in this world of lies. Most kind of you, and thank you for that donation to our Midweek Moats Fighting Fund. Matt gives 20 euros. Thank you, Matt. Very kind. Russian government pushes through its interests with war. The US and Western stands to do the same. So why the moral cries against the Russians? Double standards, nothing new in human history. Yeah, the only difference, Matt, is that our invasions of other people's countries have cost exponentially far more innocent life than this Russian invasion of Ukraine. By this stage of the Iraq war, many hundreds of thousands of Iraqi civilians lay dead. This after 1 million of them had been laid in the ground by our economic sanctions and siege on that country. Just think about that. Angela O'Meara says Democrats are going to lose all the young voters. All the young like to joyride in their first cars. We all did it. This is a rite of passage for the young. Shame on Biden. Thanks, Angela, for that. What's that? What was that song I'm thinking of? Eddie Cochran. Anyway, I'll come back to me. Hassie M says homelessness is growing fast in the US. People don't get medical care free, but they have unlimited funds to waste in arms and foreign interference. $50 billion that the American people didn't need have been given to Zelensky. Just think about that. 24-hour jukebox, great name, says blue and yellow flag down, got my white flag flying now. Taiwan flag is in the post. Yeah, I was worried about the monkeypox because I'd just taken down my Ukrainian decorations and now it was time to hoist another false flag. But in truth, the anti-China campaign follows on close behind. The Daily Telegraph in England reported this evening, fears grow for Taiwan as China makes preparations for its own special military operation. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But if it's true, and China is reunited, then classically we're going to be fighting on two fronts against two hypersonic nuclear superpowers, Russia and China at the same time. What could possibly go wrong? Mick A says, what's the force driving the SNP? Who's got the strings? Well, the EU are deeply involved in it. The German government in particular. There's always been a special affinity between the SNP and the Germans, especially under previous ownership of Germany. The people who founded the SNP were, in fact, collaborators with Adolf Hitler and with German Nazism. They wanted to offer Scotland as an ally of Nazi Germany against the rest of Britain. I've made a short documentary, 10 minutes, on this, which will go out on the hour on the mother of all talk shows on Sunday. I do hope you'll tune in and watch that. Angela again says, why Ukrainian mothers not question when their children come home with Nazi tattoos? What can I say? There are millions. We're not talking a small minority here. There are millions of Western Ukrainians whose heart lies with Bandera, the chief Nazi collaborator and perpetrator of the Eastern Holocaust. The swastika is the least of it, I'm afraid. Robbie says, why no mention on media of Nazi gangs in Ukraine, swastikas, tattoos? We can't afford for fascism to rise again. Thank you, George. Thank you, Robbie. Much appreciated. Fascism hasn't gone away, you know. It exists. Anti-Semitism, fascism, hatred of the Slav, of the Untermensch. It exists, and not just in Western Ukraine either. Galloway Radar gives £17.99. Buy the kids an ice cream, George. Forget about all this corporate nonsense. Well, I don't allow my kids ice cream except on special occasions, and I certainly wouldn't dream of using your money to buy them an ice cream. I'm raising funds for people who want a midweek maltz, and I think we're going to get there. But thanks. Anthony gives $2. Who's got a worse addiction, Hunter or Zelensky? Both of them reputedly, like the Colombian marching powder, but as I've never even seen that powder, let alone tasted it, I couldn't say whether that's the reason for the fact that both of them are certifiable maniacs. John B gives $5. Thank you. How much of Ukraine's territory will be enough to satisfy Putin that there's no more Western threat? Well, clearly, even if the river Dnieper is the border between the two parts of what was Ukraine 110 days ago, there'll still be a threat, but it will be further away. It will give more missile defense time. It will ensure that there is no physical interpolation of force, physical force on the ground into Russia without having to cross the river and all of that eastern Ukrainian territory. But it doesn't guarantee Russian security, only a security architecture that makes everybody safe and threatens nobody would do that. And NATO will never allow that. Patrick McCarthy, a good friend of mine, says, would you be in favor of American states seceding from DC? No, I would not. I'm against breaking up countries. No good comes of it. No good has come of it. I'm against it. Claude says, I never understood how UK Labour members accept royal titles. Although Australian Labour has gone the way of UK Labour, thankfully it would still be regarded as a betrayal of the cause to accept one. No longer in British Labour, I'm afraid. John Thompson says, Galloway desires subjugation of the Scottish people at the hands of the English. Yeah, that's what I just said. I just gave you a long talk about how I accept the subjugation of the Scottish people at the hands of the English. You pitiful, pathetic, playground, toy town Scottish nationalist who imagines that the Scottish people, who include presumably my neighbour, the Duke of Buccleuch, are being subjugated at the hands of the English, who include the working class people on the streets of Newcastle or Liverpool. You see how puerile this false dichotomy is? How utterly base and meaningless this fake paradigm is and how dangerous it is to the interests of the working class on both sides of a non-existent, for now, border between the Scottish and the English. Begone, you puerile tramp. Keith Hayes says the culture is the work of a country that was bought and paid for a long time ago. Nothing remains of any idealism in the US, and most certainly no American dream. Well, it's called the American dream, Keith, because you'd have to be asleep to believe in it. Have I got time? I do. David Otness says, I've had 70 plus years to observe the USA up close. All I can say, watching the increasing rapidity of its implosion, is faster, faster. This before the monsters at the helm can do more damage. Now, I don't go for that, David. I don't want to see the collapse of the United States. I don't want to see the beggaring of the people of the United States. I don't want to see its breakup. I don't want to see it suffer. I want to see it stay at home and attend to its myriad problems, from coast to coast, from sea to shining sea. That's what I want to see. I want to see the American people be great. I won't say great again. I just want to see them be great and play their part in a family of nations around this tiny planet of ours. I saw a picture the other day of the size of this planet Earth compared to the mass of another planet in our own solar system. Never mind the billion planets that exist in all the other billions of solar systems, just in our solar system. The Earth to Jupiter was like a tennis ball to Mount Everest and more. And yet here on this tiny planet that God gave us with such beneficence, we're unable to construct a sociology that even remotely begins to approximate to our technology, to our ability as a species. It's utterly tragic, you know. I don't want to go all philosophical, still less theological on you, but really give yourself a shake. Let's see. David says, I gave £50 2 weeks back, and I wanted to thank you for speaking the truth week in, week out. You are a godly voice in a very murky world. May God bless you and protect you and your lovely family. David, thank you. I'm moved by your words, and God bless yours. I see them in your avatar there. God bless your children. Eric Suarez says the United States wants to destroy Odessa. They want to humiliate Russian culture, even if it costs more Ukrainian lives. Well, the good news is, Eric, they are failing mightily. Russia is winning the war and will win it comprehensively in time. I've got a minute and a half left. Mama Laska says the United States, there's nothing more than a multinational corporation that masquerades as a nation. Hashtag petrodollar. Any more? Well, that came from Aussie. Why not? Says the Fed raised 0.75 today. They should take advice from Russia's bank governor, Elvira. She did an outstanding job. She certainly did. I would have thought if she's in the market for another job, there would be a lot of people could do a lot worse than appoint her as their governor. Is that my cat I can hear scratching in the background? If a cat suddenly appears on your screen, I apologize. Tanya Keane says the Pakistan trade minister says citizens must ration themselves to only 2 cups of tea a day, as tea is imported and money is needed for fuel. Good luck with that one, Shabazz. Any more? Only got seconds left. One more. Press like button. Thanks. Okay. I'm metaphorically pressing the like button. It's been marvelous. See you afterwards in 5 minutes on my Patreon page, patreon.com/George Galloway. Or if not, join me on Sunday at 7 p.m. London time for the mother of all talk shows. Thank you.